products on government's policies, programs, projects, and activities, which are then channeled through various communication platforms. GIU, your official source for news and information on the government of Montserrat.
Valorizing, Valorizing. Oh, yeah. Well, I know it's that time to tell the world what is Montserrat Prime. So sit back, I tell you that all the products are made in Montserrat. Let me tell you, cause you don't know, it's produced in Montserrat Expo. Why they choose this extempo thing, I hope the whole community can sing. Ba-do-ba-dai, ba-do-ba-dai, oh, ba-da, ba-ba.
This is my message, so heed the call. Calabash and Prime is festival.
Prepare and bring plenty money. Come buy your oils, wine and even honey.
Arts and crafts with some baked goods, chairs, beds, coffins, all type of wood.
Vegetables, nutmeg and spice, I tell you, all the gifts that prime nice.
You are listening, so now you know this event will develop and grow.
Look how these vendors spend their good time creating products to sell at prime.
Determination and hard work too. They toil and sweat to make them for you.
To make me tell you one more time, the only place for you to be is at Prime.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of SHV 30. We have an exciting program today. My name's John Blundy from Oxford University, and I've been asked to introduce the first 2 presentations, which will be recorded video for reasons that in the second case I'll make a little bit clearer in a moment. So first up, we have a message from Robbie Bulock. Robbie is the Director of the Overseas Territories and Polar Regions at the FCDO in London. And so without further ado, if we can start the video for Robbie's presentation.
Hello, I'm Robbie Bulock. I'm the Director for the Overseas Territories and Polar Regions at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. I'm here today on behalf of Minister Doughty, who I know was very keen to join you, but unfortunately isn't able to. However, in his absence, I'm delighted to be able to take the opportunity to speak to you all. It was an honour for me to join the recent Thanksgiving event at Westminster Central Hall in London to mark the anniversary of the volcanic eruptions which had such a devastating impact upon Montserrat 30 years ago. It was the first official event that I did in my new job, and I was moved by the stories, the positive energy and the strong sense of the Montserratian community. This week's conference is marking the same dramatic events where I know you'll be learning from the challenges of the past and coming together and working towards a much better future for Montserrat. I've heard that there will be more than 50 institutions and more than 15 countries represented today, which will offer a diverse range of views. I'm sure it will be a fruitful and fascinating exchange of opinions, generating lots of new ideas. At the heart of that exchange, of course, will be the Montserrat Volcano Observatory, whose important work is not only vital for the island's safety, but is also a globally respected centre of excellence. And finally, I want to pay tribute to the people of Montserrat. As I heard during the Westminster Hall service, 30 years on, the legacy of the Soufrière Hills eruptions remains a living reality for many. The emotional scars of loss and change, as well as the physical scars on the landscape, are all part of the daily life on the island and among the diaspora. Those who lost their lives, their livelihoods and their homes remain in our thoughts. But as we reflect upon this very painful chapter of history, let's also take a moment to recognise all that Montserrat has built in the face of that adversity. This is also a very strong and inspiring story of courage and determination. The people of Montserrat have adapted, rebuilt, and are determined to build and shape a bright future. Today, the UK continues to stand with the people of Montserrat as a partner and as a friend. I very much hope to visit the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean soon to learn and to listen and to see firsthand how Montserrat is shaping its next chapter. I wish you all the best for this week's conference. Thank you.
Okay, that was a very heartfelt message. I thought it's hard not to echo some of the sentiments expressed. I'm asked to remind you that the stakeholder evaluation workshop has started in the conference room upstairs, and anyone who plans to attend that should make their way now. Perhaps they already have. Okay, the next speaker unfortunately can't join us in person. It's a complicated story. I'll start at the beginning. That when I heard that SHV30 was not only looking at the volcanic events of the last 30 years, but was also taking a look forwards, it was clear that geothermal energy would be on that list of forward-looking options. And I work in geothermal myself, and I thought it would be interesting to hear the story, I think a truly remarkable story. In fact, I think globally the greatest story of geothermal development, and that's the African nation of Kenya. And I wanted to invite a scientist from Kenya to come and present the geothermal history of Kenya. And I think it's hard not to find it inspiring. 1970s to today, when Kenya is number 6 in the world for geothermal energy electricity production. It's very soon to join the gigawatt club, currently has 985 megawatts of electricity installed. Everyone who works in the Kenyan geothermal industry is Kenyan. The training is done in Kenya, and they are exporting that expertise to other countries that are starting on their geothermal journey. I've had the privilege to visit Kenya and see firsthand what they've done. It's remarkable, and I hope we'll learn that from today's presentation. So despite those good intentions, the problem is that if you fly into Montserrat from Kenya and you go via St. Martin, you need a visa, and it wasn't possible to obtain a visa in time for today's speaker. So he recorded this presentation yesterday. The speaker is Dr. Patrick Kariuki from Dedan Kimathi University of Technology, DCUT, in Kenya. That's the foremost center of geothermal excellence and training in the country. Patrick himself is a graduate of the University of Nairobi. He has postgraduate degrees from Tsukuba in Japan, I'm struggling to remember the others. They may come to me in a minute. And has been at DCUT for a number of years. He's going to tell us today the story of the geothermal development. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll have a chance to ask him questions afterwards, but if the internet allows, then I hope he'll be online and we can ask him some questions. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Patrick Kariuki's presentation.
So good morning. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon from the Rad of Kenya. Once again, I want to thank you very much for giving me the honor, or rather inviting me to give this presentation of the journey that Kenya has taken in the development of geothermal. I'll start by introducing the topic of the day, which is geothermal development in Kenya, historical perspective. And I am Patrick Kariuki, who will be presenting this, coming from the Geothermal Energy Training and Research Institute of Dedan Kimathi University of Technology back in Kenya. So to start off, I would start by giving an outline, or rather an overview of what I'm going to present, and we start off by looking at an overview of the institutional structure in terms of energy in Kenya. Then I'll look at a brief description of the power sources and their potentials in Kenya. I'll then go on to give a brief outlook of the geothermal sector in Kenya and dwell much more in depth into this geothermal sector in terms of Kenya geothermal resources. I will touch a bit on the various technologies or the evolving technology over the years in this sector. Then I'll touch on direct uses currently going and some at a study or other pilot studies. And then of course look at the companies which operate in this industry currently in Kenya and some of the challenges that Kenya and of course in other areas, in other parts of the world. And conclude by stating one or two elements of what are some of the future plans, especially more so on the direct use and more usage of the geothermal products in various areas or other thematic areas. So to start off, I want to present the institutional structure in the energy sector, where we have a ministry that is dealing with energy and petroleum. Within this ministry, or rather under this ministry, which is mainly involved in policy making, there are various what we call sagas, state agencies, which operate under the ministry, and this comprise of the Energy and Petroleum Tribunal, which basically is a kind of a judicial system of resolving disputes in case they arise either between the producers and the consumers, or rather everything that involves the energy sector. Then we have IPRA, which is the regulating body and kind of polices the energy sector on behalf of the government, under which we have three categories of sagas, what I called, or rather I refer to as state agencies, state and government agencies. And these comprise of generation group, transmission and distribution, where in the generation component we have the KenGen, which mainly generates power. Then we have the Geothermal Development Company, which was set up solely for exploration for geothermal resources. We have the independent power producers, and recently we have a nuclear power establishment that was set up to explore the future usage of nuclear, or rather production of power from nuclear energy. Upon generation of the electrical power, it has to be transmitted to the users, and therefore in between the two other bodies, we have the transmission organization, which is referred to as KETRACO, which means Kenya Transmission Company, which is also government owned. Then of course we have the distributors to the extreme right, which mainly of Kenya Power, which is the main distributor, rural electrification, and private entities. So that is as much as the institutional structure in the power dynamics goes. And I would like to touch a bit on the energy resource potential as has been established from various studies, where it has been established that geothermal can give us 10,000 megawatts if fully exploited. Hydro can give us 6,000 megawatts, whereas wind can give us as much as 30,000 megawatts. 300 megawatts from cogeneration, 15,000 megawatts from solar, and 101 from biomass. That is the potential through various studies which have been established to be possible in terms of electric power generation from the various sources. Now, to touch on what the current mix is, or rather the current status is, as of this year, or rather late 2024 last year. It has not changed much. We have here I provide a summary of the mix of the sources that we currently have, courtesy of IPRA. We have the geothermal giving us 49% of the power currently in use in Kenya, thermal providing 12.4%. Then we have hydro giving us approximately 30%, solar at 2%, and wind at 12%. So that is the current status of the generation mix in terms of electric power. Now, if we were to look at our installed plus import capacity that we are currently utilizing in order to run the various systems within the country, we can see clearly that we have geothermal giving us 950 megawatts, of which 800 is being generated by KenGen, and of late we have the GDC itself giving us from a plant that they have in Menengai, giving us around 35 megawatts. Then we have the independent power producers to 150 megawatts. And then the biomass, we have approximately 2 megawatts from independent power producers. In terms of hydro, we have now we have a total capacity of 839 megawatts, of which KenGen give us other produces 826 megawatts, and independent power producers producing around 13 megawatts. In terms of solar, we have a current production of 210.3 megawatts. Excuse me. And KenGen again giving us, in terms of wind power generation, around 26 megawatts with the independent power producers, providing us with around 410 megawatts. And from the thermal, we have approximately 646 megawatts, which we are trying as much as possible to draw down as we generate more from the clean energy sources. In terms of imports, we have Uganda providing us with 50 megawatts, and Ethiopia supplying us with approximately 200 megawatts of energy. And off-grid, we have around 38.4 megawatts in total. In terms of the distribution, this is a setup. In terms of how the power comes in and how the power is distributed. So we can see, for example, in the north and west region, it's hydro dominated. In the Turkana region, we dominated. In the central region, we have geothermal dominating. Whereas in the major cities like Nairobi and Mombasa, we have demand dominated regions. So that means, that tells us that it is a mix of the various sources. So now, getting into the gist of what I was asked to present, I would want to give an outlook of the geothermal sector as is currently in Kenya, where we are always proud to say that Kenya was the first country in Africa to explore and generate geothermal electricity at a commercial scale. And as I have previously stated, we have a potential of around 10,000 megawatts from the RIP system. It has been estimated at around 10,000 megawatts, which then means that we are only using 10% of the potential. So we are still way off the potential that we are likely to get from what we have in the RIP system, or rather as a potential. Now, in terms of the exploration, the exploration for the steam, it started earlier than the 1960s, but for what we are now producing, you can say that this began in the late 1960s to mid 1970s, and this was undertaken by the state-owned Kenya Power Company. And if I was to take you back to the institutional structure, you realize that this was a behemoth kind of government agency, which was producing, transmitting, and distributing. And for efficiency, then it was broken down to those components of generation, transmission, and then distribution for efficiency. And these, together with UNDP, were the ones who actually initiated the exploration of geothermal in the 1960s and the 1970s. And eventually, we had the first geothermal well, which was commissioned in 1981, producing around 15 megawatts. But since 1981, we have walked a journey. We have traveled a journey where geothermal, as you have seen in my previous slides, is now giving us 950 megawatts, which is way above the 15 megawatts that was produced in 1981, and therefore actually becoming the main base load in Kenya, where when we talk of the base load, we say that, for example, there is a fluctuation of the wind and the solar power that is generated that we have stated up there, and where they fluctuate based on weather conditions, for example, then the geothermal backs up the deficit. So that's why it has become the base load. Originally, remember, we had hydro as the base load, but now geothermal has become the base load, thus showing the level of development of the geothermal sector in Kenya. And yet, we have only exploited 10% of the potential, so we can go far and we can develop more if only we can have the right resources to develop the whole 10,000 megawatts. So, because of that fact, and the fact that geothermal is clean energy, the government of Kenya has found it important to accelerate the geothermal development, and therefore has made it actually the top government priority, so as to be in a position to meet the national power needs and to take advantage of emerging opportunities in the green hydrogen production, which can be a process undertaken in conjunction with the geothermal power production. And it has been established that Kenya is currently ranked 6th in the world with the installed capacity, as we have previously seen, of 950 megawatts. So now, if we are to get deeper into the geothermal resource development in Kenya, we can look at the historical aspects which led to there being the need, or rather the kind of urge to do research and to explore the potential of geothermal in Kenya. So we see the various scientists which have in the past described the presence of geothermal potential as far back as 1887 by Ron R. von Hoher, who noted active volcanoes as of then. Sykes in 1934 noted steam jets in the Jorowa Gorge, where he described them as discharging vapor under considerable pressure, and believed that where local conditions are favorable, power generation was possible. So you can see the potential of geothermal goes as far back as 1934. And this had been confirmed in those early years by several boreholes which had been drilled and encountered steam, and from which there was inferred temperature gradient. Now, in 1943, we had drilled PC and Pink in 1945, who visited the Buru and Rokaria, Jorowa Gorge, and described the steam jets occurring in these localities. Mark Core in 1957 also described, or rather gave an account of geothermal steam occurrence within the reef system, with special reference to Nakuru. Now, going further and looking at the genesis of the current geothermal fields that we have, that is the Orkeria, and now we are moving to Menengai, eventually we are also going to Baringo. We see the Orkeria geothermal field being developed, or that initial stages of the development of this field in the 1950s, and between 1950s and 1976, where various activities of the party independently and jointly contributed to the drilling of the first geothermal wells, where the first well drilling started in the 1950s, with the first well drilled between May 1956 and 1959. The second ever geothermal well to be drilled in Kenya was done to a depth of 942 meters, and this was completed in July 1958, where several attempts were made to bring it to production, but they also unsuccessful. After the two wells, unfortunately, attention shifted to hydropower, which was the in thing then. And so there was a hiatus in the geothermal exploration and production in Kenya. But due to problems globally, where both globally and locally, where the hydropower was had to be capital intensive and limited, and then there was a steady rise in global oil prices. Attention was drawn back to geothermal energy. And that is why in 1967, when the sensitivity was carried out between Lake Bogoria and Lake Naivasha, where the geophysical results indicated potential of geothermal and actually recommended exploration drilling. And this was to be realized in 1969 when the government of Kenya requested for financial assistance from the United Nations for a large-scale exploration project. And the project was funded by UNDP and the East African Power and Lighting Company then. This East African Power and Lighting is what eventually became Kenya Power and Lighting, which was further now subdivided to the generation, transmission, and distribution. And by the end of 1970, the new exploration program was started in earnest. That's looking for geothermal. Now, beyond the two wells that were originally drilled in the 50s and 60s, additional wells now are drilled in this project, where the drilling was carried out as a joint project between now the funders, the UNDP, the East African Power and Lighting Company, where the drilling started on 12th October 1973 using a modified T12S rig. And by January 1975, 4 wells, which were referred to as Orkaria 1, 2, 3, and 4, had been completed with Orkaria 1 drilled at 1,003 meters, with the other wells drilled up to a depth of 1,350 meters. In the late 1980s, APC obtained, rather Kenya Power Company obtained an N370 rig to accelerate the drilling, because now, as you have seen, the hydro source was becoming expensive, and there was also that element of the global conditions leading to the need for increased demand on the geothermal. Now, further increase to demand meant that between 2011 and current, and also the changes in the global dynamics to the current, there has been increased demand for geothermal energy, and these are seen KenGen acquiring through drilling deals, while the GDC, which is mandated actually to explore for geothermal, acquiring 7 rigs, which now currently are very busy working as we talk. These rigs were financed by the African Development Bank, and the GDC is currently using these rigs to do Menengai fields and the Barigo fields. As you'll see later, there are several areas, there are several unexploited, around 21, which requires to be exploited so as to reach at least maybe 50% of the potential that we have. So it's work that will continue for quite some time. And these rigs, of course, are modern and have capacity to drill to greater depth of over 3,000 meters depth. And they also have the capacity to drill directional wells. So they are quite technology. We can say that the technology in them allows flexibility in terms of giving us what we are looking for. And of course, technology keeps developing, and as the technology develops, the organizations charged with the exploitation of the geothermal field resources in the country move with the times where possible. Now, in terms of the wells, that is after the drilling, you can see that these rigs, due to the new technologies, will drill both vertically and at an angle. And they, of course, drill in a series of stages, with each subsequent stage having a smaller diameter than the previous stage, and where at each stage the well is secured by casing and cementing before you do the subsequent stage for stability. And the improved technology has actually seen the drilling of wells with high output of up to 30 megawatts capacity. So you can see as the technology improves, and even as the demand improves, then we are able even to have higher capacity. In terms of the completed wells, where, for example, we have established, or rather we have generated the steam, and before connection to the main power kind of generating unit can take some time. And as you can see here, it can take between 24 and 36 months. So the companies which are drilling for the steam, that is the GDC and Kengen, have come up with wellhead technology which enables them to generate power in the meantime before it's connected to the major production, or rather generating plants. And that is what we are calling the wellhead technology. So this is another development that has increased efficiency in terms of us having more power as we continue with the process of building up the generating plants. So this technology actually involves tapping steam from the wells. And as you can see in the example that I've shown in Buru there, which those wells which are undergoing tests or are waiting to be connected to the main power plant, we make sure that we benefit from early generation. So you can see, for example, this wellhead is giving us 2.0 megawatts for connection with the main power, or rather main generating plant. So it's a way of actually recouping some of the expenses that you have undergone in the production. Instead of leaving it waste, you generate in the meantime. And this has increased, of course, efficiency in terms of time taken to have power on the grid. Okay. And Kengen, for example, started this installation in the 2014, 2015. Now, you can see that is as far as the journey of production wells, or rather sinking of the wells. Now, in terms of setting up the power plant, without repeating myself, I can say that we commissioned the very first power plant in 1981 with a capacity of 15 megawatts. And later, we had 2 units added into this in the year 1982. This is November 1982 and March 1985, bringing the total capacity from that unit to around 45, I beg your pardon, megawatts. Of course, the plant is owned by Kengen, the government of generating company. Now, between now 1986, now beyond now the 1985, between 1986 and 1998, drilling continued in search of steam so as to set up Orkaria 2 power plant, which is located in the northern sector of Orkaria, where a total of 30 wells were drilled by 1992 in this northeast sector of the field. Unfortunately, some political instability and inflation, so both political and economic, were experienced between 1992 through to 1997, which resulted in financial, because these are high spending projects, which requires sometimes external donors, so the financiers pulled out, and therefore no major works were undertaken until 1999. So there was a period of hiatus in terms of exploration, further exploration. But fortunately, in the year 2003, 70 megawatts Orkaria 2 Unit 1 and 2 power plant was commissioned by the then President, the late President Mwai Kibaki. And in this commissioned Orkaria 2, there was in excess steam from the drilled wells, which led to a third unit of 35 megawatts being added in May 2010, therefore bringing the total capacity of Orkaria 2 to 105 megawatts. Now, this Orkaria 2 power plant was designed and constructed using newer technology, because the technology keeps evolving. Therefore, it's highly efficient in steam utilization. Now, in the year 1997, because of reforms which were initiated in 1996 in the energy sector, independent power producers rather were kind of, in the energy reforms, independent power production was actually part of the reforms. Allowing independent power production was part of the reforms in the energy sector. So in 1997, we had Ormat International license to generate 48 megawatts from what is referred to as Orkaria 3. And in August 2000, Ormat, through its local subsidiary, Power 4, commissioned 80 megawatts, that was later increased to 12 megawatts from a combined binary pilot plant. And this was actually the first geothermal plant to use binary since the inception of geothermal. Now, there is what we refer to as the Orkaria 280 megawatt project, which can also be described as Orkaria 4 and Orkaria 1, addition of units 4 and 5, which were started with the aim of each of them producing 140 megawatts. Now, Orkaria 1 units 4 and 5 draws steam from the Orkaria East and Part 3 Northeast sectors. And in 1999, Kenyan drilled 3 exploratory wells for Orkaria 4. Yeah, so because they keep increasing now the potential, the capacity of production, which are located in the dome sector of the Orkaria geothermal fields. And this was funded by government in 2006 for appraisal. And production commenced in 2007. That's giving us more steam. Yeah? And production and injection wells were drilled. And now, with the improved drilling technologies, as we have previously seen, deeper and directional wells going down to 3 kilometers were drilled in this Orkaria 4. So, with that historical perspective, you can see that as of now, from those early years to current, we have still had an increase in geothermal production up to the current, where we have 900, actually currently it's not 950 megawatts, because we have a plant now in Menegai, which is giving us 35 megawatts. And by the end of the year, we have some other two private plants which are also being constructed, each with a capacity of 35. So we are likely to get 105 megawatts from Menegai. Yeah, so you can see that we have had a steady growth in geothermal power, and that's the reason why it has become the base load for the power utilization in Kenya. But as previously indicated, we have 21 geothermal fields which have that potential of giving us 10,000 megawatts. With only, now we can say this 950 plus 35, which is already in the grid, and to add 70 more by the end of the year. So we can see that we are getting to the range of at least 1,000 megawatts, but we are still way far away from fully exploiting the capacity and potential of our geothermal system within the country. So, and this development, of course, has mainly focused on electricity generation. And unfortunately, we only have 6 fields which have advanced to exploration drilling phase out of the 21 which have the potential for us. Of course, we have more and more private developers being licensed, and of course the 2 public developers. And of late, it has become very attractive, because what GDC is doing is it is taking the risk to explore, and then after establishing the presence, or rather after bringing the steam up, then it sells the steam to independent power producers. So it is becoming, it's accelerating in terms of a takeoff by the private developers, because they are being de-risked by GDC, because they are picking the steam and then producing the power. Okay, so we have 2 fields, only 2 fields generating. That is Menengai, which is giving us 35, and as I've said, will give us around 105 by the end of the year. And then we have a third field which has also been found to, we are referring to Espaka, also being done by GDC, which has also given a potential of 35. Yeah, so we are still way from actually achieving, maximizing on the potential that we do have. We are only at 10% as of now. Now, other than the generation of power, there are various direct uses that have been introduced in the geothermal system. Some of them are at piloting stage, and some of them are actually operational. Like, for example, in the case of Osirian, it's operational, it's not pilot, but operational. So some of the direct energy uses that have gained kind of popularity within the fields that we have, due to their economic and environmental efficiency and energy efficiency, is application in agriculture, like for example the Osirian farms. We also have some pilot studies on crop drying, space heating processes. Just a minute, I think just a minute. Yeah, so this is Osirian in horticulture, in recreation, the spas, and then we have fish pods, heated fish pods, make the fish grow faster. All these are, especially these ones here, are at pilot stages within the GDC geothermal. But of course, you also have the locals condensing the steam and using the resultant water for domestic use, pasteurization of milk, and those are some of the current uses that they are being subjected to the steam, or rather beyond now power production that geothermal is being used for. But beyond that, there is the potential there is the potential, excuse me for that, uses under research. For example, in the GDC are trying to see how the same can be used for meat processing, because the edible oil and soap processing, because it requires heat, processing of ice and skins, selective production, and most importantly, we are, especially Kengen, in the Rocaria field, we have several researchers looking at grid communal extraction from the brine rocks that is ongoing in form of research. Of course, there are various challenges, or rather, before we go to the challenges, some of the companies that are operating include the government-owned, the Kengen and GDC. We have seen that we have license for 14. There is Africa Geothermal, the National Limited, Akira Geothermal. This was the very first that was licensed and actually is in production. We have Susu Energy, Capital Power, SNG International, Kishan Compressor, Arus Energy, among the 14 that we are talking about. Now, those are the companies which are actively currently involved. Of course, it keeps evolving as more interest is developing. So eventually we know that we are going to get to some point where we are going to have enough companies joining in the exploitation of the resources. It's quite encouraging. But of course, there are challenges which come with the geothermal development. And one of it is what we call steam venting, which during the low demand, you have to release the steam because it is not required. The grid does not, the consumers don't require that much energy. So that is a challenge that we need to overcome. Maybe it's part of what can eventually develop to the hydrogen production, maybe. And then we have there is the integrating geothermal intermittent sources like solar and wind. Okay. While reducing steam for geothermal plants, there is investments in evacuation infrastructure, which is wanting for the geothermal power. The rate at which we are producing sometimes does not match the rate at which we are investing in that infrastructure. There is also the de-risking, and that's the formation of the GDC. Okay, so that we allow for geothermal capacity. So you can see that de-risking has now been almost taken by the government, so that after the production of the steam, now you can hand it over to the private power generators. Then there is the synergizing the public sector and the independent power producer concession license holders, so as to accelerate geothermal power production. You see now, some of these independent have been given some blocks. So now, and sometimes they don't have the capacity to accelerate. So they kind of hold. That's the need to synergize the public sector and the independent, so that we are able to accelerate the production. Of course, there is market competition in terms of unit production of the power from geothermal, from other energy sources which might be cheaper. For example, wind and solar. So that is a challenge. And of course, we have complex regulatory frameworks and lengthy permitting processes. So some of the challenges that face the sector. But with time, as you have seen the institutional structure, we try to keep solving them as we move around. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening to me. It was a pleasure presenting to you, and I'm open to any question or clarification. So asante sana, which means thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
And thank you, Patrick. I hope you agree, that's a masterclass in how to go renewable in your energy. We pootle around on the margins in the West and think we're making great advances. That's renewable. That's really impressive. I am I correct in thinking we don't have an opportunity to do live questions with Dr. Kariuki? No. Okay. That's a shame, but I hope that resonated with you all. And just to put that in context, you saw a little wellhead generator. There's a photograph. Wellhead generator in Eburu, 2.5 megawatts. That little thing, that little box with steam coming out, that would meet all of Montserrat's geothermal needs. That simple. Anyway, I'm not the chair of this session. Perhaps someone else would like to step up to that task. Is there someone? Okay, I'm the chair of this session. The next... Oh, well, that's why I'm asking. Well, come on then.
Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to the session Geothermal Resources from Exploration to Sustainable Development. Before we start, whilst we had that last talk, I did a quick Google, and Kenya produces more geothermal energy than Iceland and Japan, which really surprised me. That's an amazing story. Anyway, we have 4 presentations. I remind the speakers they are limited to 12 minutes each, and I will give them a sign with 2 minutes to go. So we start with a Graham Ryan doubleheader, and the first presentation is a developing understanding of the Montserrat geothermal system. Dr. Ryan.
Okay, thank you very much. Just first off, I have a Kenyan pedigree as well, because in my previous life I worked a lot with 2 Kenyan experts in geothermal exploration, Dr. Stephen Onacha and Dr. Peter Wameo, both brilliant, hardworking and very inspiring, and taught me a lot of what I'll be presenting here today. So it's very interesting that connection. So, clicker. So a lot of these, this is a whistle-stop tour through a lot of work. So a lot of these slides could condense a whole presentation themselves. So I'll be going quite quickly and giving a very, very quick overview. But so if you have questions, which you would do, you can ask them later. I need a clicker. No, it isn't. You stop the timer. Thanks. Okay. All right, so geothermal is not new in Montserrat. We've been talking about it for many decades. First shallow wells were drilled in the late 60s. MIDAV 1972 recommended geothermal power production, and there have been several studies from the 1970s to 2008. So it's something we've been talking about for a long time. I got involved in this in 2009 as part of the exploration that was done then, that was headed by EGS. There were multiple facets to the exploration. So like volcanology, geothermal exploration is a multidisciplinary effort. And so we had geochemistry, geology, geophysics. There's Biltong helping out with the geochemistry. And from one of the main powerful tools in geochemistry is the geothermometers, looking at getting the fluids and indicating what temperature the reservoir was. And so from samples from Hot Water Pond, it looked like it would have at least 180 degrees Celsius. They did some structural geology work, which kind of indicated where you might have suitable structural locations that would host the reservoir. And then my part was the geophysics. So I was doing magnetotellurics and time domain electromagnetics, which measure the subsurface resistivity down to several kilometers. So for geothermal systems, high temperature geothermal systems, one of the main targets is a low resistivity clay cap, which is indicative of a high temperature reservoir. So that's kind of one of the main things that you're looking for in an exploration. So from that initial exploration, the EGS report came out with some recommended areas. So the first priority area was in the Cork Hill area for potential drilling. And this some further work refining that, trying to put all of the available geophysical data together and jointly interpret it to kind of get a better idea of where the most prospective or the best places to drill might be. So we have in Montserrat, we're lucky we have a lot of geophysical data available. So we have the P wave, which that orange nose that's coming out there, that's the P wave velocity anomaly from the sea calypso. So and then we have the magnetotelluric resistivity, which is the No, I don't have anything here. So this is the resistivity here, and that orange is a very low resistivity clay cap, which is very indicative of a high temperature reservoir. You can ignore the magma body. That turned out to be just an artifact. And also, in the early stages of the eruption, there was a seismicity under St. George's Hill, so put those hypercenters into developing the conceptual model. And then a rough idea of what the main structural directions, kind of main fault zones were going through that area. So putting that information together and kind of coming up with proxies for permeability and temperature, so indicating that the hypothesis was that the low P-wave velocity anomaly was associated with higher temperatures in the reservoir. Putting that information together with the kind of estimated permeability structure, come up with something like this. And these dots were the wells that ended up being drilled, the two wells. So when it comes to drilling, you have to take into account logistical considerations. So you can't just go, where you might want to go. So this is some further work. So after drilling, there was we can retrieve temperature gradients from the wells over here and look at what the P-wave velocity anomaly looked like in those wells. And so what we did in this work was to see what the correlation between the temperature profile and the P-wave velocity anomaly was, and use that to estimate what the temperature would be in the rest of the reservoir from the P-wave data. And so that indicates we ended up with estimating highest temperatures kind of right underneath St. George's Hill. So one of the key questions is how much power. So there's a simple stored heat calculation, which is basically just calculating how much heat is stored in the reservoir. And then if you say, okay, we're going to run this for 30 years, how long will it take to use all of that heat? You need, estimate a few things, so that you can. Well, the main thing is like what's the volume of the reservoir. So the key, one of the key points was to use from the resistivity data to estimate what the area of the system was, because as I said, the low resistivity clay cap indicates the top of the reservoir, and then from the well data we could estimate what the thickness of the reservoir is, and then come up with an estimate for the temperature in the reservoir and the total stored heat capacity. So we did that and used Monte Carlo estimation for using software from De Freitas 2014 to come up with some uncertainties. And when you do that, the median power output comes up to about 35 megawatts electrical. And these are the Monte Carlo realizations. And again, because we generated an estimated temperature model for the field, we could apply that calculation to each of the blocks, or the model blocks, in the temperature model, and then come up with a different way of estimating what the stored heat and ultimate power output of the system would be. And so doing that, we come up with a median or best estimate of about 52 megawatts. So there's two different techniques come up with what in geothermal, which is like volcanology, a very hand-waving and approximate science, come up with quite similar to first order estimates. So this is some quick other work. So we have a wealth of data. We have gravity data, which yields density. We have the resistivity. We have P-wave velocity, and those are all three-dimensional data. So we can have in the subsurface each point a three-point vector of values for each of those points. And using fuzzy clusters, we can see if we can split that up into different families of points. And when you do that, arguably come up with about 4 different clusters, which we interpreted to be the unaltered surface, the altered clay cap, the reservoir region, and then the deeper igneous kind of basement. Okay, all right, so I'm going to go through. So this is some other work that was done by Bassant for her PhD, taking core samples from the wells and the measuring in a triaxial rig at high temperature, permeability, porosity, P-wave velocity, S-wave velocity, and resistivity. And so one of the key findings is that the samples are quite tight, as in low permeability. So from about 10 to the minus 16 meters squared to 10 to the minus 22. And different of the samples have different responses to pressure. So when you increase the pressure, the permeability varies. So and different lithologies have a slightly different response. So in general, the core samples are low permeability, so which indicates that structural permeability associated with faults and stuff like that would be the most important source of permeability. But there's also potential for permeability enhancement, like similar to fracking, so you can get these more sensitive layers and deal with them. So finally, the power output estimates that used in the 30 to 50 megawatt range. Directional drilling may be able to access those higher permeability areas because of the logistical difficulties of drilling vertically. Permeability enhancement could increase the output of the wells. You can use clustering analysis to better synthesize the geophysical data. There's still more work needed to understand exactly what the P-wave velocity anomaly actually means, but more geophysical work is needed to better characterize the reservoir, which is, I think, where John and others' RESET project should hopefully filling in a lot of gaps. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Graham. We have time for a couple of questions. Any questions? Comments? At the front. The microphone is slowly coming. Even quicker.
Graham, for your calculations of the sort of long-term viability and power output of the reservoir, how are these very, very low permeabilities, how do they impact those estimates?
So, not really. I mean, so the calculations and the classic stored heat calculations don't really figure in. It's really you're just estimating how much thermal energy is stored in the reservoir. So that's what that's based on. There's more work which I could have put in. So we've done some tough 2 modeling, which using the seismic geothermometer model, and so using that you can get more kind of, I guess, relevant estimates of like kind of what the what the outputs are looking like. But as I said, like it's going to be mainly controlled probably by structural permeability. We did some other structural work on St. George's Hill, looking at the faulting on that, and it's kind of riven by these cross-cutting faults, and so likely that structural permeability will be controlling the flow. So I think more modeling work could be done to answer that question.
Thanks, Graham. Really interesting. How much added value would you get by looking also at shear waves and perhaps VP/VS ratios? And then a second quick question is, I presume you couldn't drill in exactly the best location because of the hill. Yeah. And do people ever do directional drilling in geothermal so that you can?
Yeah. So I mean, it comes. So Mon 3 is failed for various reasons. But one option would be there to use the top kilometer of that well and then kick off from it and then directionally drill towards a more promising direction. I mean, actually, Mon 3 would have been a good well, but it was due to well collapse and clogging of the well with drilling mud that meant it couldn't be used in the end. But if we were to redo it, you can kick off from that and then target it and drill directionally. Directional drilling is done all the time. Often you'll have a well pad, and then you might have 5 different wells coming off of that single well pad.
Okay, we have to move on. Our next presentation is by Graham Ryan, and the title is Evidence for Gold in the Montserrat Geothermal System from Neutron Activation Analysis of Core Samples. Take it away. Okay, so this was just for fun, really. So I had a colleague, and he said, "Have you got anything interesting that I can blast some neutrons at?" And I said, "Well, we have some core samples, so let's see what happens if we do that." So we talked about, so Mon 3 goes to about 2,700 meters. Thanks to Steve Sparks, we managed to get NERC funding to core that the well. So we retrieved core at 3 intervals at 1,478 meters, and at 1,700 meters, and at 2,100 meters. So this is where the cores are retrieved, and core 1 around 1,400 meters is a medium grain crystalline andesite. Core 2 again medium grain crystalline andesite, and then core 3 is again igneous volcaniclastic sediments, but also strangely some carbonates as well. So down at this isn't quite right. It's not that deep. Anyway, yeah. So some carbonates as well. So this is the neutron capture reaction. So you have a sample, you fire neutrons into it, you get an extra neutron in the nucleus, which makes it, you get a compound isotope, which is unstable, and it will spit out a gamma ray,
And then after that, that isotope then spits out a beta particle and a delayed gamma ray, and produces a more stable nucleus, or sometimes another unstable nucleus that goes through a similar process. And in this case, we'll be looking at the delayed gamma rays, and by looking at the energy of those photons and the half-life of the decay, you can determine what isotope would have been there, and then you can also calculate what the concentrations are, etc. So this is the neutron generator. So this was my colleague at Delphi Technologies. They build neutron generators, and so he asked if there's anything interesting that we could do with it. And so here we have a deuterium plasma being energized by microwave energy, and then you apply a voltage, and that accelerates the deuterium ions into the titanium target. And then once the target loads up, you can start generating fusion reactions, deuterium fusion, which generates neutrons. So this is the neutron generator. The neutrons that are generated are high energy, so they're going about 7% the speed of light when they come out. So we put them through a high-density polyethylene moderator to slow them down to thermal speeds, thermal velocities where they interact better with the samples. So this is what it looks like in Dave's very tidy lab. His actual name is actually Dave Williams as well. And so the sample goes under there where it's activated with the neutron stream. And then after it's been activated for a period of time, you take it out and measure it with the high purity germanium detector, which gives you the energy of the photons and the number of counts. He also uses a Geiger counter when he takes out the samples, because they can often be quite radioactive at first. So he just takes that as a precaution to see what kind of dose he's getting. So this is the core. So there's the retrieved core, and then the samples that we actually irradiated or activated down here. So this is what's done. We have the sample under the generator, and it activates, and the activity increases as you irradiate it. And then when you pull it out, it starts to decay. And that decay half-life is characteristic of what that element might be. I won't go into that. So this is just saying that you can use the amount of activation to determine a neutron flux, which can then let you calculate what the concentrations of the different elements are. So this is some calibration work. So the detector has varying efficiency depending on the energy of the photons, lower efficiency for high energy photons and higher efficiency at lower energies, and then also calibrating the high purity germanium detector so you can correlate the channel number to the photon energy. And to do these calibrations, you use a number of sources, radioactive sources that have known activity, and obviously known gamma ray spectra and energies. So this is some data for the 1368 electron volt peak from sample 1. So this is what the sodium-24 would look like. So this is how the counts decay with time. And so you end up with a half-life of about 16 hours, plus or minus, whereas the expected is about 15 hours. So this is what a gamma ray spectra looks like. Okay, so we're going from about 0 to 2500 kiloelectron volts, or 2.5 mega electron volts, and each of those spikes is the gamma rays from the delayed gamma rays from a particular isotope. So I'm focusing in on this, so I won't go into all of it. So the one I found most interesting was the gold peak. Here, And we saw that in a number of samples. So this is some data from the samples that were analyzed. So we have sodium, manganese, aluminium, vanadium, sulfur, gold, cadmium, titanium. And so what we see is in samples 21, 22, and 23, we have measurable concentrations of gold at kind of ore-bearing concentrations. This is in parts per million. So from 2, which I'll maybe talk about a bit later, to 24 parts per million. But what we noted was those samples that produced gold were only the carbonates. The igneous samples didn't indicate the presence of any gold. So here we have from the bulk XRD the amount of calcite. So samples 21, 22, and 23 are 60 to 21% calcite. And then we also see in sample 23 there's also a bit of pyrite as well. So this is where I think the audience can help, because this is really just a physics project, but people who know more about petrology and that sort of thing be really useful to talk to you. We were just interested in just having fun. So it's well known that geothermal systems are associated with metalliferous deposits, gold, copper, etc. So here, this is from, I think from Wairaki. So this is a geothermal pipe that geothermal fluid went through. One of the things that can go wrong in a geothermal well is if you're not careful, you can scale up the internals of your pipe. And so this well pipe got scaled with silica. But when they retrieved the silica, they found it had very high concentrations of gold and silver in it. And this is some additional information. So this is from Plale et al. 2014, where they did some analyses of metals in some of the rocks from Soufrière Hills Volcano, and they found that within what they interpreted as conduit shear zones, where gases or volatiles were fluxing through, they saw elevated levels of gold. But the concentrations are in the parts per billion. So what we see in the carbonate samples is 1,000 times higher than that. So final thoughts is that the carbonate bearing samples contain gold at ore grade, concentrations up to 24 parts per million. The good thing about AU 197 or 198 is it's readily detectable by this technique because there are no close photo peaks, so there's nothing to interfere with it. And the half-life is 2.7 days, so it's relatively easy to be very sure what you're looking at. The igneous samples did not contain measurable gold, so only the carbonate samples, and going back, those carbonate, the ones that sampled the carbonate also had measurable amounts of sulfur 36 in them. So this is where I'm out of my element, so I'm happy to get more information from people that know more than I do. So epithermal deposits often have sulfur-bearing gangue minerals such as pyrite. Sulfur acts as a primary ligand for transport of gold in aqueous solution and is an agent to precipitate ore minerals in general. So for sample 21, where we saw 2 plus or minus, about 2 ppm, I think there was a bit of a suboptimal placement of the sample, so it's possibly an underestimate. But it looks like the presence of calcite is necessary to precipitate the gold-bearing minerals at the high concentrate, or that much higher concentrations from the geothermal fluid, which is possibly similar to the formation of skarns, which form when granites intrude limestones. So one of the questions is, could there be gold in other places on the island? Could there be epithermal deposits with carbonates that may be more accessible? Interesting to speculate. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Graham. I packed a shovel and a couple of pans in my Jeep just in case. But I think that's too optimistic. Do we have any questions? We have one here from Mr. Lynch.
It's more related to the first presentation. Many of the water sources throughout the region have dried up. And this has been attributed to climate change. From your exploration activities, can you tell whether there will be enough steam, water for steam, you know, in your wells? Is it that the wells are drilled way below the aquifer?
Yeah, I mean, the wells in Montserrat are very deep. So the deepest one is about 2.8 kilometers, and the shallowest is 2.3. So the fluid is coming from very deep. But to answer your question, I mean, Montserrat still remains extremely rainy, so there is quite a lot of meteoric recharge. But chemical analysis of the fluids indicates that the geothermal fluid is maybe roughly 50-50 seawater and meteoric water. So I don't think recharge should not be a problem for Montserrat.
Any more questions?
Going back to the gold, when we were at the Trust last May, there was an article in one of the archives, a BGS report of gold in carbonates. Does that any comment on that?
No, I haven't seen it. I would like to see it. But certainly we seem to have found gold in some carbonates.
Okay, we can talk about it.
Any more questions from the audience? One right at the back. Up the side of, Michael, up the side of the thingy. I don't know what that bit's called.
Look like you're pointing at wings.
My question is more related to your first presentation. The intended installed capacity of the 3 wells was about 3 megawatts. Our wells range from about 2.3 to 2.6 meters. The presenter from Kenya spoke of wells 1,300 meters and even lower. Your calculations show that the capacity can range from 35 to 50 megawatts. Why was our intended install capacity so low, so far from the actual potential of those wells? When you spoke of low permeability, which of course favored high temperatures, why the disparity?
Yeah, so I mean that question is probably beyond me, but it's a matter of steps. So the first wells that were drilled actually skipped a stage. So it's often common to drill slim, non-producing wells just to get the temperature, but the decision was made to go for production exploration wells. So this is still in officially kind of the exploratory phase where it's like getting a proof of concept. So the wells are drilled, but unfortunately the step after that of generation and then coming up with a plan for further development, that stage hasn't been reached. So we're kind of almost still at the exploration stage.
Okay, thank you very much. So we will go on to our next presentation, the title of which is The Legal Framework of Geothermal Resource Governance and Sustainable Development in Montserrat and the Commonwealth Caribbean. And it's being presented by Alicia Elias Roberts.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to adopt the protocols that were already established. and to thank the organizers for allowing me to do my brief presentation, and also to give special thanks to the RESET group with their research from Oxford University for inviting me to participate in a workshop, which is going to occur after lunch today, and I use the opportunity to do this presentation. So my background is that I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Law at the UWI St. Augustine campus based in Trinidad and Tobago. This is my second time coming to Montserrat. Yesterday, I was at the Runaway Got, and I believe the folklore. If you drink of this burn to Montserrat, you will return, because I was here in 2014, and when I got the invitation to return, the first thing I thought was, oh, that is a real thing, that I was invited to return to Montserrat, right? So my first time was more in terms of capacity building and training in administrative law and natural justice, etc. But in respect of the extractive industries, the environment, energy, that is something I've been very passionate and interested in, and I've studied in that area for over 20 years and lectured and done various consultancies in the area of oil and gas extraction, renewable energy, sustainable development, etc. So geothermal energy naturally was something that I was interested in, because yesterday I met one of the attendees at a conference, and he asked me about my background. When I said law, he was surprised, like, what is a lawyer doing here at this conference? So I appreciate a lot of the previous presentations centered on, the scientific side, the geological side, etc. But we have to appreciate that law is relevant in all the different sectors, because you need a legal framework to operate these different sectors, whether it's from the domestic law within the state, the regional laws, the international laws, understanding the project from its birth to its operation to the end, and the removal of the installations and so on. You need laws to govern how the regulated industries will operate. So law is always relevant with new technology, new things are discovered. So I quite often work with multidisciplinary teams. So whether it's AI and innovation, whether it's geophysics, whether it's engineers, geologists dealing with the extraction of some mineral, you need the laws to feed in. And you also have to appreciate and understand all of that technical thing to feed into the comprehensive legal framework that you create. Right, so my presentation, quickly, in my few minutes, I want to basically look at the topic, look at the legal framework here in Montserrat, look at some potential legal issues and comparative analysis with Texas, which one of the participants from the RESET project from the University of Oxford had brought to my attention, and then I'll give my quick conclusion. So in my introduction, as I said before, there is a project, RESET, Rethinking Natural Resources, that we're going to hear about after lunch, and that was the impetus for me coming here, and I decided, okay, I'm going to look at some of the islands and their laws, and also look at why this matters, obviously in terms of renewable energy, socioeconomic growth, the long-term energy sustainability and security of the region, also climate change mitigation, and various states trying to reach their nationally determined contributions under the climate change regime. These are important. Right, okay, whoa. I don't know what just happened. Let me try and go back. Why did that happen? I don't know if I can go into full screen. Maybe it was, how do I go into the full screen? Can you change it here? Well, it was probably apt that this quickly shifted for me, because this is the technical part that I will not try to explain, because we heard a lot of this from Dr. Ryan that came before, the technical aspect. But what we appreciate in the legal aspect is that we cannot draft the laws in isolation in terms of what the geochemistry will say, what the geology will say, what the geophysics will say. You cannot just come out in isolation if you don't appreciate and understand the technical aspects of the actual operation to know what happens when you do the prospectivity to determine the mapping of the reservoirs. Is it something that might straddle more than one licensed operating area? Is it something that remains in place in terms of ownership rights or things that could transfer and conflict? what happens throughout the production, what's the life cycle and the phase of that, and then what happens in the end in terms of environmental concerns and communities that might be impacted. So from the legal perspective, we have to understand the general ideas of the project so that we can say these are the relevant laws that should be applicable. It's also for states to determine, in terms of their legal overview, if we have laws, do you want to have a license to operate here at different phases of this project? Will there be contracts that the regulated companies will have to sign? Do we have international obligations to consider? Are we ticking off all of those boxes in terms of our fiscal and legal framework, etc.? So I started to do some preliminary review of the laws in Dominica, Montserrat, Grenada. So I have a list of them there. Most of the laws will set out and establish the determination of whether this is property. Is it a mineral? What do we call geothermal energy? The nature of geothermal resource. And what I found interesting in the provisions here is that it said it's sui generis property. And then for the avoidance of doubt, a geothermal resource is not a mineral, nor a water resource, nor a real property. Because in law, we like to know ownership. We need to know what is this thing? How do we define it in terms of ownership and how it transfers? And that is important in terms of the kind of document you issue to transfer those rights. So it is very unique. It is sui generis in terms of the nature of a geothermal resource. And the laws generally would provide for some type of regulatory body, like here there is a Geothermal Resource Steering Committee that will deal with the issuance of agreements to regulate how the geothermal industry will be developed in this jurisdiction. And there are also provisions concerning compliance and environmental safety, provisions dealing with royalty and so on. So ownership, under the Montserrat Geothermal Resources Development Act, it provides that notwithstanding anything contained in any law or title, geothermal resources, whatever ownership or tenure, are deemed to be and always be vested under the control of the governor. So we saw in one hand they're saying that it is not real property, but when it comes to the ownership, that it is vested in the crown. There is reference here to sustainable development, and since the theme of this session is on sustainable development, I thought I should point that out, that under the definition section of the Act in Montserrat, it refers to sustainable development under the Geothermal Resources Act. So it will be managing the use, development, protection of the geothermal resources in a way or at a rate which enables people and communities to provide for their social, economic, cultural well-being. So providing a kind of holistic approach to the development that, the concept of sustainable development looks at not just the present, but it thinks of future generations. So it talks about foreseeable needs of future generations. So that concept that has been around, from the Brundtland Commission report and many United Nations General Assembly resolutions and treaties and documents is here in the Montserrat Act, a reference to developing the geothermal resources in a sustainable way and thinking of the people. Right, there are other laws that would be relevant. I'm not here attempting to go through all of the relevant laws, just to highlight some of them, like the Radioactive Minerals Act, that is relevant to you see here, you're looking at substance. They have a list of minerals defined in the schedule of this act, and the mining of those minerals, you have to review the laws to this law that would be applicable. There's also the Minerals Vesting Act, that also talks about the minerals being vested in the crown, which is similar to what we saw in the Geothermal Act. Licensing and Utilities Act, and there are a number of other laws, if you think about it, that would regulate the industry in terms of the procurement, in terms of how companies operate. Because if you have foreign companies coming to operate within a jurisdiction, there are many laws, labor laws, etc., that could be impacted. So I said this is not intended to be, comprehensive and covering everything. What I find interesting as I started to work and to hear about the work that Reset is doing, they're investigating, they said, the feasibility of extracting valuable raw minerals, such as lithium and other minerals, from the wells, from the streams, and from the geothermal fluids, I should say. And I found that interesting because conventionally we just think about geothermal energy, power generation, reducing the cost of electricity, etc. But there's this other potential, and the law sometimes will just be looking at the framework concerning the generation of electricity, and then you have to go to other laws to find if you're extracting minerals and getting a license to do that. But if there's the opportunity to combine the two, it would be for the state to then determine, do we have a comprehensive type of contract that will cover the two? Do we have a legal framework that we want to now develop that would cover these two things that could come together, or keeping them separate? Potential legal issues. This slide is not intended to be all comprehensive, but just to highlight some of the potential issues I have there. Good governance, getting the community engaged, sustainable development, the legal framework. There's so many potential legal issues. Because when a state is deciding to get involved with extractive industries and major sectors, and you invite in, whether it's bids or one-off negotiations, you invite regulated companies to come in, you have to think about the ownership of the estate, who owns the mineral rights in the mineral estate, environmental issues, the community that is involved. Do you want to have your nationals employed in that industry? What type of laws do you have for that? Or is it just a policy that you have? Are you attracting foreign direct investment for this? Do you have revenues to put up for this project? Are you taking any of the risk, or are the companies being invited to come in and take all of the risk? And that could impact how you negotiate, the terms that you have, the revenue sharing. If you're requiring local participation, are your locals, do they possess the capacity? Do they have the training and the capacity to manage this industry? Because just now we heard from the Kenyan example where it took years to build up to that capacity. So these things do not happen overnight. So are you thinking of, you can't just copy and paste a law from another jurisdiction and bring it here, because you have to think about the size of your population and the reality in terms of the commercial realities of whether this would be commercially feasible and viable. Right. One of the things that we do in oil and gas contracts and exploration is that they look at the commercial viability of projects and the declaration of commerciality. Quite often that comes from the investors, that they will drill the well, they look at the sulfur content, the viscosity, and various elements, and then make that determination. And also the price of oil, that would be volatile and fluctuate on that global market. But here, if you're producing for a particular sector, then I guess the financing will be different, and you're going to have that kind of feed-in and that buy-in. So it's so complex in terms of thinking of the risk involved. Even as you do the seismic graphs and the general idea about the prospectivity, as we heard from Dr. Graham Ryan before about the work that was done for years in Montserrat. Businesses want to know, am I still taking risk, and what level of risk, and what are the potential in terms of profits for my shareholders? What are the issues in terms of stability of the contract? Will the contract be changed or terminated if there's a change of government? Or will there be guarantees that this contract will remain in place, regardless of politics, the tax, you not introduce new taxes on me. After I take a lot of risk and bring investment to your country and create jobs, I don't want the change of the contracts. What about dispute settlements? Will there be international arbitration if there's a problem? And between the regulated industry, the companies, and the government, those are things you have to think about. And companies sometimes also look at corporate social responsibility. Right, in Texas, there are cases that, I'll just skip to this case, where the Court of Appeal was looking at whether there are issues in Texas in terms of lithium extraction from wells and ownership rules. But we have to bear in mind that what occurs in the US is that they have federal and state laws and also a hybrid system of public and private mineral rights. What this means for Montserrat is that all the minerals belong to the Crown, so there's no private mineral ownership. So some of the issues that you might find being litigated in Texas will not apply here because it's a different legal system. I saw the sign that I had like a minute ago. So the challenges and the conclusion will be that there are opportunities in geothermal energy development and also critical raw minerals here, not limited to lithium. from the geothermal fluids. There can be benefits. It can bring wealth to the country. It can create jobs. They have to be managed. And you have to think about a comprehensive framework. What is the best deal that suits the circumstances for the state? And also think about sustainable development, because you don't want to just develop for the present, but think of future generations, think about climate change, your carbon footprint, etc., that this is a renewable type of project. There are lots of opportunities I saw online with development funding. I saw the CARICOM Development Fund recently signed a financing agreement with a company in Dominica for the geothermal energy project there. So the CDF is given $15 million in a concessional loan to finance this Dominica geothermal power company with their locally registered entity for this project. This development project will be the first geothermal power plant in a CARICOM member state. So I thought that was quite exciting, and that's recent. So thank you for your time and attention. Okay.
Thank you very much. I found that very, very interesting. We don't really have time for questions unless someone's got a very pressing question. I'll give it to Dr. Ryan.
Okay, so the Crown owns the minerals in Montserrat. How does that, or is there some sense of how that impacts on development, whether the minerals are owned by the state or by individuals? Because there might be different incentives.
Yes.
Given that.
Yes, if it's a private person who owns the mineral, then you'd have to get a lease from that person to do the operation versus going straight to the state to get like a license. So when you have systems that are hybrid with public and private mineral rights, you have to engage with the private person to get a lease, separate from engaging with the government to get a license. So in the Commonwealth Caribbean, we have Trinidad and Tobago as the only state with a hybrid mineral rights. It goes back to their history. And all other jurisdictions in the Commonwealth Caribbean, they have the state owning all of the minerals. They have adopted the UK position that it vests in the state or the Crown. Yeah.
Okay, I have one last question from myself. We're in an earthquake region, and there is a link between geothermal extraction and small earthquakes, and there is a small potential for generating larger earthquakes from a geothermal field. Is there a liability for generating large earthquakes that cause damage? Is that covered by law, or do you just let it go to litigation? Wow,
that would be like acts of God. And we have laws around the tort area that could look at, it depends on how you classify that, if it's foreseeable or not foreseeable. So the laws look at foreseeability, and that would determine that. But I would have to reflect on that, and maybe over lunch we can talk more about it, but that's fascinating, yeah.
It could be a new career as a legal seismologist.
Oh, yes.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Very interesting talk. Yeah. So we now come to our last presentation of the day, and one that has given me a new word for my vocabulary. The title of this talk is Valorizing Geothermal Systems, and it will be given by John Blundy.
Valorizing just means giving value to. It's not a fancy word. Okay, this is one of a number of presentations at this event that are related to this program that you may have heard a little bit about. It's funded by the Oxford Martin School, a philanthropic unit at Oxford University. And it's a very broad project. I'll say a few words about it in a minute, but let's just get back to valorizing for the moment. I'll just mention the institutions that have also supported this work, either in kind or financially, and I'll have a list of acknowledgements a little bit later. So I have a project funded by the Royal Society called From Volcanoes to Green Mining, which is really about looking at the potential of volcanic systems to deliver more than just ash to the local population. There's a lot of synergy between what Graham talked about and his colleagues at MVO, and without that collaboration, we wouldn't be able to do what we've been doing. I've had a lot of support from the Premier's office, including the Premier himself, and I'd like to acknowledge that. and then FCDO have been very supportive as well. So geothermal systems is really quite easy to understand. There's a heat source at depth, a magma body, not exclusively, but usually a magma body, and then fluid in a confined reservoir above that heat source is extracted to generate typically electric power, and then the spent fluid, after the heat's been taken out, is re-injected so that you don't deplete the reservoir. The reservoir itself is filled with fluid from two sources. One is some kind of superficial water, meteoric or seawater typically, and then there's also an input, a rather less tractable input that comes from the heat source itself, so magmatic fluid. In terms of power generation, there are lots of different ways of doing this. There's single flash, double flash, binary plants. The details aren't particularly relevant here, but you take out the hot stuff, remove some energy, and put the cooler stuff back into the subsurface. It's base load energy. Excuse me. The sun doesn't need to shine, the wind doesn't need to blow. Geothermal power works at night and well, during hurricanes actually. It's a form of renewable energy. There's a small amount of carbon dioxide in the fluids, but this is a very low CO2 emitting energy source. I think we've heard the Kenyan example. You can tell I'm quite evangelical about that wonderful story. There's something more than just power in the geothermal system. We can think of a geothermal ecosystem, an energy ecosystem. There's power. There's also direct use. You can take just the hot water and typically you pass it through a heat exchanger and you can use it for agriculture, aquaculture. You see the big flower farms down in the bottom left there. You can dry grain and you can also use it for tourism. Some of you may have been to Iceland or New Zealand or indeed Kenya, where there are geothermal pools that the Premier mentioned in his address the other day. So don't think of it as just a source of electricity. Think of it as a remarkable natural gift, and ideally we recover all of the value. We fully valorize it from where it comes out of the ground to where you put it back into the ground. One way of valorizing it that is, it's fair to say, is grossly underexplored globally, is recovering more than just heat from those fluids, but actually taking out their metals. They're hot fluids, they contain dissolved metals. Those metals originate from a range of sources, just reaction of that superficial water with the reservoir, which depends on all sorts of details of the reservoir, lithology and the fluid flow. But there's also an input from the magmatic heat source. And looked at broadly, we call this a saline geofluids resource landscape. Saline geofluids, just salty water, and the resources, in addition to heat, being metals. And a fun fact, if you don't get anything particularly out of this talk, is the graph on the left that shows the total amount of metals discharged profligately to the atmosphere by volcanoes matches the amount that's mined for pretty much everything except for iron and aluminium. So that is, volcanic systems blow out their tailpipes about the same amount of a wide range of critical metals as we actually mine. You can't put an umbrella over volcanoes and harvest that, but it just gives you a scale of the importance of magmatic systems in global resources, and it's why pretty much all ore deposits around the world are related to ancient volcanoes. In terms of the architecture of geothermal systems, I'll use the New Zealand example because it's very well characterized. Graham alluded to that earlier. North Island of New Zealand, the Taupo volcanic zone, is blessed with a lot of geothermal prospectivity, and the power plants are shown in the, or the fields, I should say, are shown in the map on the left. The key characteristics are usually revealed by electrical resistivity studies acquired through different means, but typically magnetotelluric methods. And you can see two conductors if you just look at the top image. There's a shallow, laterally extensive conductor, and that's a clay. That's a smectite clay, and it only really forms, the very conductive variety only really forms below 200 degrees. So the bottom of that layer is the 200-degree isotherm. The closer it is to the surface, then the higher the geothermal gradient is. And then the lower conductor you see, RK's Rotakawa, The lower conductor there is also fluid, but it may also have some magma. But this is fluid in the pore space. It's not clay, it's actually briny solutions. And if you look at the images below, different part of the system, you can see that those deeper conductors are often laterally connected because there are deep magma bodies and associated fluid discharge. And the little schematic on the right shows what a reservoir should look like. You want that clay seal to keep everything in place, and then you've got the heat source at the bottom. And there's normally some sort of ductile barrier between the heat source and the reservoir that is impermeable. It's permeable to heat, of course, but it's impermeable to fluids. But sometimes it's breached, and that's how you get this sort of magmatic bleed into the reservoir. And that's significant because those magmatic fluids that bleed into the reservoir often contain large amounts of metals. So if we look at the metal endowment from the example of New Zealand, and that's a map of the North Island of New Zealand, the two on the left, and you see geothermal fields where there are power plants. They're shown in red, and the number next to each of those names is the tons per year of a particular metal delivered to the surface. So to calculate the tons per year, we know the fluid flow, and we know the amount of metal dissolved in the fluid from direct chemical analyses, so we can work out a metal flux. So if you have a look at the image on the left, that's silver. And the silver flux at, say, Rotokawa is 57 tons a year. That's a lot of silver. So 57 tons a year is dissolved in the fluids that come to the surface. They have the heat extracted, and 57 tons a year of silver goes back into the well when the fluid is spent. Doesn't seem to be really a good use of the fluid. The one in the middle is for tellurium, another critical metal used in photovoltaics. Again, you see Rotokawa as the standout there. 70 tons a year of tellurium come to the surface. They go into the turbines, and 70 tons a year come out of the turbines and back into the reinjection well. If Rotokawa was a nation state, it would be the second biggest producer of tellurium in the world after China. But Rotokawa doesn't produce any metals whatsoever. And that's because the companies that produce power are not the companies that produce metals. And I think Alicia highlighted some of the regulatory challenges to producing both electricity and minerals. But there are also industrial and economic arguments as well that I can discuss, but we won't waste time on those. The big challenge, of course, is how do you get those metals out of solution? That is a really pressing materials science problem. There are various points in what you might call the geothermal value chain. I illustrate those on the right. You can try and take the metals out deep in the well. You can take them extract them on the way up the well. You can recover them from the spent fluid, or you can actually modify the re-injected fluid to scavenge further metals from the reservoir. So that's how we would do this, and this isn't science fiction. There are various materials that will recover metals selectively from relatively dilute fluids, but that will be a different presentation. So, recognizing that remarkable opportunity in geothermal systems, RESET, the program I mentioned, had several research questions. The metal's endowment of the fluids, what controls their metal contents in time and space. So the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that Rotokawa is the big hitter in the North Island of New Zealand, but neighboring fields like Wairaki and Tamariki don't produce any metals at all. So it's not a universal endowment. How would you get the metals out? I've just mentioned that. Can you take out the metals and the heat simultaneously? Would regulations let you? Would any industry even entertain that prospect? Or do you have to keep them separate? Are geofluids a viable economic alternative to mining? There's no pit. You're just taking the fluid out, processing and putting it back. And Alicia addressed the final question. So I'm just going to talk about metals endowment. And the great opportunity in Montserrat is not only do you have a large and a rather obvious heat source on the doorstep, and one might argue that that large and obvious heat source owes you, it's payback time, but also geothermal wells were drilled in 2013 and 14, and I think some of you may have seen them yesterday. They're a little rusty, and arguably that's an opportunity missed. And again, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that Kenya's huge upsurge in geothermal power occurred in 2013 and 2014. And I'm afraid on Montserrat, that wasn't much since then, apart from Mon 3. So there are wells. There were some boreholes for the Calypso geophysical project. There are also springs, some of which are hot, and they provide a remarkable data resource for this project. So in this particular work package, we've been looking at the drill core. That's the picture in the bottom. We look at tiny little aliquots of trapped fluid in minerals from the drill core. Those are called fluid inclusions. That's the picture at the bottom with those little sort of dotty things. We've sampled the hot water pond. We've done an electrical resistivity survey. This is the University of Alberta in the top right. We have attempted to flow the well. Didn't go very well last time, but we're going to succeed in September. There were technical reasons. It's not that the well won't flow. And then we will have our own samples. And then the image at the top shows that we actually also do hydrothermal experiments. So we simulate the processes that are taking place in the reservoir by reacting a fluid with a bit of Montserrat rock at some elevated temperature and looking at the scavenging of metals. So we're kind of midway through the RESET project. We've completed the MT survey. This is really for you, Graham, because this is the latest image processed with rather more advanced techniques that have developed. And firstly, you drilled in exactly the right place. And secondly, our image looks just like yours. But there are some rather interesting comparisons that can be made. So the red layer there, that's the smectite conductor. And smectite appears in hydrothermally altered rocks when the temperature is below 200 degrees. Above 200, the clay is illite, and that's not a conductor. So if you have a look at where the red line is, the bottom of the red line corresponds to a depth on the temperature profile of 200 degrees. This is a very well-behaved system. And if you also look at the well log, that's the image on the right, the amount of smectite clay reaches a maximum at exactly the depths where the magnetotelluric trace goes red. So we understand this system very well, and you'll see that we want that 200 degree isotherm to be that bit close to the surface, because it means everything's hotter. Mon 1 and Mon 2 are bang on. Future processing of these data will go deeper. Next, we can look at the rock physics. So Racine Bassant did some very nice work with Graham on measuring physical parameters of the rock core from Mon 3. We've measured a few more parameters as well that are also useful in building these reservoir models. The take-home message is that the porosity is not unusually low, but the permeability is very low. And what that tells us is the fluid flows along fractures. It may not react as much as you might expect in a more permeable reservoir. And it explains why, for the most part, the fluids here are unmodified superficial waters. But they're not completely unmodified. They haven't reacted a lot with the reservoir because of the fracture flow, but they have received magmatic inputs from the Soufrière Hills magmatic system. And it's those magmatic inputs that give you a sniff of the metal flavor. We've also done experiments. I won't go through the experiments in any great detail, but along the bottom is time, and the vertical axis is the concentration of an element. And what you see is at 200 degrees there, reacting, this is seawater, with these rocks, produces a huge increase in metal endowment in a matter of days. And that just tells you how incredibly reactive glassy volcanic rocks are to hot fluids. So that any metals that are in the rocks, were there to be any, and that isn't just the magmatic rocks, it's also the carbonates that we talked about earlier, they very quickly go into the fluids. And the plot on the right, that's just two stable isotopes, oxygen and hydrogen, and the line there shows that there's a spread of values indicating a mixture of seawater's in yellow, and then some magmatic input, which is where that red arrow conveniently sits right now. How would we know what was in the magmatic fluids? Well, we can look at the fluid inclusions, and the plot on the left just shows a multi-element plot. I compare Montserrat to various other sites in Tuscany, in Japan, and Ascension Island, and you'll see that the red dot is a bit of a standout for silver, unusually high silver contents. I don't have gold numbers. The image, that's what the magma might be supplying to the fluids if there's any breach in the ductile seal at depth. and if we're getting a little bit of a magmatic flavor into the system. The plot on the right just shows the elements for which we have data from the MON1 fluids, what we have. It's actually what was in Graham's fridge for the last year or two, so suboptimally sampled fluid that we will resample in September. And then I compare that to what's actually in those fluid inclusions. Those are the big red dots. And you see that what we're sampling in the fluids that come out the well are much lower concentrations than the magmatic fluids because of the sampling procedure. Many of those metals get precipitated during the sampling process or on ascent to the surface. So we need fresh fluid samples. We will collect these from the wellhead in late September, and Premier Mead has very kindly made that possible. So I can see that Rod is getting agitated, so I'll stop. There's a list of people I'm going to thank, but that isn't quite the end of the show, because I'm going to show you a movie. It's a 1-second movie, and Richie said the other day that Richie Robertson, that we should think big, think of the future. To me, the future is very beautiful, and it looks like that. And all of that, in fact, that's way more than Montserrat needs. All of that is possible with a system like this, and my message would be, hurry up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Do we have any quick questions? We've got time for one quick question. Dr. Ryan. Oh.
So you said in the New Zealand there was the high rates for silver, etc. So what's the main challenge? What's the biggest challenge to extracting that at the moment in an economic fashion?
The biggest challenge to extracting the metals economically from proven resources. Okay, so if I'm Contact Energy or Mercury, the two big power providers of geothermal in New Zealand, I've got a good little gig going. I make electricity and supply it to the grid. I don't really want to mess with my well-established systems to try and take metals out of the fluids. Previous attempts to do this in the Salton Sea led to challenges in the power production because of delays in the fluid. If you take too long processing the fluid before re-injecting it, the reservoir starts to get depleted. So developing a synergy between those two economic activities is the biggest challenge. I think the materials science challenge of getting low concentrations out of fluids, that can be doable, and they can be processed at sufficient throughput at the surface.
Okay, so I'd like to thank all the speakers in this morning's session. That was very interesting. We are, of course, way off schedule, but I think we've now got a 15-minute break, so we should reconvene here at 11:45. Thank you very much.
The Government Information Unit, GIU, is the communications arm of the Government of Montserrat. We serve as the official platform for news and information for and about the government's ministries and departments. We develop information products on government's policies, programs, projects, and activities, which are then channeled through various communication platforms. GIU, your official source for news and information on the Government of Montserrat.
Well, I know it's that time to tell the world what is Montserrat Prime. So sit back, I tell you that all the products are made in Montserrat. Let me tell you, cause you don't know, it's produced in Montserrat Expo. Why they choose this extempo thing, I hope the whole committee can sing. Ba-do-ba-die, ba-do-ba-die, oh, ba-da, ba-ba.
This is my message, so heed the call. Calabash and Prime is festival.
Prepare and bring plenty money. Come buy your oils, wine and even honey.
Arts and crafts with some baked goods. Chairs, beds, coffins, all type of woods.
Vegetables, nutmeg and spice, I tell you, all the gifts that Prime nice.
You are listening, so now you know this event will develop and grow.
Look how these vendors spend their good time creating products to sell at Prime.
Determination and hard work too. They toil and sweat to make them for you.
To make me tell you one more time, the only place for you to be is at Prime.
The Government Information Unit, GIU, is the communications arm of the Government of Montserrat. We serve as the official platform for news and information for and about the government's ministries and departments. We develop information products on government's policies, programs, projects, and activities, which are then channeled through various communication platforms. GIU, your official source for news and information on the Government of Montserrat.